Going by their spec sheets, the new optimized for Galaxy Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, bigger batteries, but still smaller than the S21 and S21 Plus, and new front-facing camera are the real highlights. That new Snapdragon chip in particular is one of the best, most attractive features. There's no Exynos variant, and we have already established in our S23 Ultra review that the Snapdragon chip is great. And on the smallest Galaxy S23, the one we're reviewing today, that Snapdragon chip has to power a screen with a lower resolution. Combine that with the increased battery capacity, and the Galaxy S23 should be a considerably better phone than all of its predecessors, especially when it comes to battery life, which has always been the Achilles heel for compact phones. But is that really the case? Well, let's dive into this Galaxy S23 review and find out. For the Galaxy S23 series, Samsung has streamlined the look of all three models. While the Galaxy S22 Ultra was the only one with individual camera rings at the back, this time the individual rings are present on all three. It's part of Samsung's efforts to bring consistency to devices from different segments. For example, the Galaxy A54 has a similar rear-facing design. The Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus looks more premium than any of Samsung's mid-range phones, there's no doubt about that. Of course, the most important question for prospective Galaxy S23 buyers is whether the phone is compact enough for regular one-hand use. Well, for the most part, you will have a comfortable experience using the S23 single-handedly. I know that even with the new Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the front and back of the S23, there's a chance a drop could cause some damage, but the compact design considerably reduces the list of the phone slipping out of my hands in the first place. Overall, as a not so particularly big, no pun intended, fan of compact smartphones, I will say this: the Galaxy S23, like the Galaxy S22, strikes a good balance in most folks wanting a flagship experience, and a phone that fits in your pockets easily and doesn't need two hands to be properly handled will like it. The Galaxy S23 comes with a 6.1-inch dynamic 2x AMOLED Full HD Plus display with 120Hz refresh rate and HDR10 Plus support. That's all the same as what you got on the S22 and other S-series flagships these last few years. But the S23 gets an upgrade in brightness and can achieve the same maximum brightness as the larger models, 1750 nits, to be exact. As usual, that maximum brightness doesn't apply to the whole screen, but in any case, legibility in even the harshest of sunlight is not an issue. And thanks to other improvements made to the display, you also get much more accurate colors in harsh sunlight than before, though some washout of the display's colors does occur. The refresh rate on the S23 is variable, just like it has been on every Galaxy flagship's display since the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra. But it still isn't as variable as it is on the S23 Ultra's display. The S23 can only bring the refresh rate down to 48 Hz depending on what's on screen. Not something you will notice in day-to-day use, but it does mean you're not getting the same level of power efficiency from the S23's display. Still, unless you're comparing on-paper specs, the S23 has an excellent display that you will not find any reason to complain about, which is exactly what you would expect from a Samsung flagship. Colors pop, though you can switch to a more natural-looking display mode, viewing angles are wide, brightness has received a considerable bump, and you are getting the latest version of Gorilla Glass Victus 2, for protection against damage. The ultrasonic fingerprint sensor built into the display is also excellent. It is accurate, quick, and placed at just the right location for easy access. The alternative, as with other Samsung phones, is the usual generic face recognition instead of something fancy like Apple's Face ID tech, in addition to Android's standard pattern, PIN, and password options. The camera experience on the Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus hasn't been upgraded on the hardware side. There's still a 50MP main camera at the back flanked by a 10MP 3x camera and a 12MP ultra-wide camera, while the 10MP front camera has been switched to a new 12MP selfie sensor that Samsung is using on all three Galaxy S23 models. 50 megapixels sound a lot less than 200 megapixels, and that is something you will be able to notice in photos captured with a Galaxy S23 and a Galaxy S23 Ultra. Resolve detail, whether at the default mode that captures 12MP pics using pixel binning, combining multiple adjacent pixels to form one large pixel, or at the full 50MP mode, falls behind what the S23 Ultra's 200MP camera is capable of. Even at 12MP, the Galaxy S23 captures more than enough detail and has good dynamic range. Samsung has tuned up the contrast this time around so things look more vivid, but color reproduction is not always accurate as a result. For me, that's not an issue, as I'm not one from the "I want realistic photos" camp, but I can see why it might tick some users off. The last couple of years it looked like Samsung is moving towards more realism for pictures you take with the camera, but Samsung clearly changed its mind for the S23 series. Like the Galaxy S22, the S23 lets you capture both automatic 12MP images or switch to the full resolution. I barely found a reason to switch to 50MP mode, as the additional detail you get simply isn't worth the increase in file size, especially now that everyone wants you to pay to store your photos in the cloud. Dynamic range and exposure are also negatively affected, so I recommend sticking to the standard photo mode in all situations. If you can afford to store large files, then I would recommend trying out the 8K at 30 FPS mode available on the S23 series. On previous phones, 8K videos were limited to 24 frames per second and cropped a lot of the frame in order to keep camera output stabilized, but both limitations have been lifted this year. While fine detail in 8K videos is not too much higher as it is on the S23 Ultra, you will notice the difference if you capture 8K and 4K videos with the S23 and compare them side by side. The improved stabilization helps with 4K, QHD, and Full HD videos as well. If you use Super Steady mode, which uses the ultra-wide sensor so it has a wider area to crop on the sides to make it seem like your video is stabilized, you can now go up to QHD resolution and shoot at 60 frames per second. The 12MP selfie camera is carried over unchanged from the Galaxy S23 Ultra and gives you exactly the same results, so I'd recommend checking our S23 Ultra review for the details and for some selfie samples. Finally, a few words on the portrait mode. Well, like the Galaxy S23 Ultra, the S23's portrait mode works best with photos of people. For other things, including animals, the edge detection can be hit or miss, resulting in imperfect background blur, which is especially noticeable when you switch to one of the many blur type Samsung lets you choose from instead of sticking to the default option. With Android 13 and One UI 5.1 out of the box, the Galaxy S23 series of phones run the latest software both Google and Samsung have to offer. And, as you would expect, the base S23 gets all the features that the Galaxy S23 Ultra enjoys except for the S Pen functionality. One UI 5.1 is not the biggest update, but it still adds a number of new features to One UI 5.0. A built-in screen recorder, quick share, music share, always on display, dual messenger for running 2 instances of one social media app, a dedicated kids mode, and device-wide theming including Google's Material You color themes are just some of the highlights of Samsung's software. It's basically the best version of Android currently available on the market and has been for a few years now. And to top things off, Samsung promises 4 years of Android OS upgrades and 5 years of security updates to each new flagship, which naturally includes the Galaxy S23. The S23, S23 Plus, and S23 Ultra run Android 13 for now, but will end up on Android 17 in the latter half of this decade. I've not encountered any issues on the S23 or the S23 Ultra, and I'm still on the pre-release software that is installed on review units. There is always a chance that some software updates in the future might mess things up a little, but given the love and care Samsung seems to have given the S23 series, software bugs will hopefully be a non-issue. The Galaxy S23 has the same overclocked Snapdragon Gen 2 for Galaxy chip as the S23 Plus and S23 Ultra, but its base variant with 128GB internal storage uses the old UFS 3.1 specification instead of the new UFS 4.0 standard and is, therefore, not as fast as its siblings in theoretical storage speeds. In day-to-day use, performance here is no less good than the S23 Ultra, meaning this is the smoothest feeling phone from Samsung, along with the other Galaxy S23 models. Getting the user interface to falter and stutter is virtually impossible here. Remember, even though storage is slower on the 128GB Galaxy S23, the one we tested, the screen resolution is lower than that of the S23 Ultra. Features like Samsung DeX should also run great on this phone, though I wasn't able to test DeX all that much. Once I do, I'll update the review. With other intensive tasks, such as video editing and saving, the S23 gets slightly warmer than the S23 Ultra, but not enough to become a frustration. And if you have a case on, well, you will probably never notice when the phone gets warmer than normal, except if the display starts warming up when you use the phone too much out in harsh sunlight. Battery life on this phone is best described as fluid. If you're using the S23 on Wi-Fi all day long, you probably won't need to charge it until next morning while getting 5 to 6 hours of screen on time. If you throw in a few hours of use on 4G or 5G, the S23 still has impressive range on a single charge and can last you until late evening with moderate use, but it becomes less dependable and you will find yourself making sure you have a charger around. That's to be expected for a flagship phone with a 3,900 mAh battery no matter how many optimizations you make under the hood, though. And again, the S23's battery life is noticeably better than the S21 or S22. The Galaxy S23 also did pretty well in my usual unscientific but real-world charging test. It seems Samsung has made changes to how the phone handles charging for the first half an hour or so. Like the S22, the S23 only supports 25W charging, but it managed to reach 61% charge in 30 minutes when starting at around 3% battery level. The S23 reached 96% charge in 60 minutes, but then took another 10 to 12 minutes to gain that 4% required to reach 100%, which is what the Galaxy S22 does, as well. In the real world, the charging speed should be more than enough for most folks, so I'm not going to diss Samsung for not playing the numbers game like Chinese manufacturers and actually applaud that it has stepped to a charging speed that's fast but won't affect the battery's longevity too much. If a compact Android flagship that doesn't compromise on features, such as the number of cameras or battery life, is what you're looking for, the Galaxy S23 is the best there is, and you won't be disappointed if you choose to get one. It ticks pretty much all the right boxes and is possibly the best compact flagship Samsung has made yet. What do you think? Tell us down in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe and activate the notifications bell. Thank you for watching.